Before I start, I just want to say how cool it is to see so many people here. I've gone to many meetups and there's usually 2 or 3 or 5 people there, and that's kind of what I was expecting tonight. And it's really exciting to see this many people coming out for this topic. I think the first time I gave a presentation on CI/CD and on Dockerization, I had about half the group come up to me afterwards and say, "What's Docker?" And that was 3 years ago. That's how fast the adoption of that technology has come through. So seeing everybody here and knowing that people are interested in it and getting it done and fighting some of the fights that I've already fought with executive management is really cool and really cool to see. So yeah. I think it's time for the match. Sure. All right. Everybody, I'm Jay Kramer. Here's a little bit about my history. I was at Microsoft for 15 years up in Redmond. Worked on MSN, worked on Windows Embedded. If you've ever used an ATM machine, it's probably got security patches that I wrote on it. I also worked on Windows Setup and Windows Server for a little while. And then I moved down here to the Bay Area. A friend of mine was working at a dating site called Zoosk. So I went and worked at Zoosk for 5 years. And then for about a year and a half, I was at Narvar. And I'm actually, we've separated our relationship. So right now I'm trying to figure out the next thing I'm going to do. But it was while I was at Zoosk that we started into containerization and CI/CD. And it was really interesting and a good environment to do that, because a dating site is a lot like a TV channel. It's always on. It has rises and falls. It has different seasonality. But any time that you aren't improving your service, anytime your service is down, anytime you're missing anything, you're losing money. So uptime was vital. And being able to deploy quickly was vital. So we were always looking for ways to improve. So I have a terms and definitions thing too. Our friends were talking about, I think it was continuous development. And I've heard also continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Yeah, my area, what I've done is continuous delivery, and that means deploying into production several times a day, which is really cool. Is everyone familiar with continuous deployment? Yeah. Do you know Amazon does continuous deployment? Do you know how many times they ship new code into production every day? Anyone know the answer to that? 20,000 times a day. Yeah. Yeah. I'm not there yet, just to be clear. But that's what I think we should all shoot for. That's what I think would be really, really cool. And I already talked a little bit about containerized code. I'm glad to see that everyone knows what that means. That's an important thing. What about observability? Who's heard about observability? I see a few hands around there. Yeah, observability to me is the other big part of being successful in this area. And observability is just simply, you could put it in as simple terms as possible, it's monitoring. But it really goes deeper than that. It goes to actually looking at what your user traffic is doing on a minute-to-minute basis, seeing when people are starting to not use your features, trying to figure out what's going on at any time. That gives you, there's a huge amount of advantages there that are very practical from a CI/CD and deployment perspective. And there's also advantages that go to selling your executives, because you can show them when things are being successful very quickly and when they're not. And interestingly enough, you can also see when you have like certain security, if someone tries to hit you with a bot, if you've got really good observability, then you'll know quickly, and that's very cool. So my journey to CI/CD, very simply at Zoosk, 2017, we were deploying into production once a week. And we thought that was pretty darn cool. We brought in an agile coach to try and help us go faster. And he told us, I can get you guys to deploying into production every 2 weeks. And we said, well, we're already shipping every week. He said, oh. That's a good thing to keep in mind, though, when you're talking to a lot of these people who are looking for ways to accelerate. A lot of the industry hasn't caught up with CI/CD yet. It hasn't caught up with the fact that we can move a lot faster than a 2-week sprint. So you'll probably hear that if you haven't heard that already. So what did we do? I mean, the simplest way is we refactored our code base into containers. I love that that's one sentence. There's so much pain and work in that one sentence. One of the guys who was on my team was working with me showed me a cartoon, and I tried to bring it tonight, but I couldn't find it. It was the journey into the cloud for a monolithic service in a data center and a brand new one. In the monolithic service in a data center, the journey was fighting a dragon, and you had all the DevOps who were wizards shooting lightning, and all the developers who were fighting with swords and everything. And then for the new service that was starting out early, was just like letting a little bird go. Here you go. Fly, be free. Yeah, refactoring our entire code base into containers, and then eventually moving it into the cloud was a very long, painful project. We also built an automated Slack-based deploy bot. I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. And another part of our factor is we created on-demand, constantly updated, cloud-based test environments. I've worked in a lot of different places with a lot of different test environments, and every test environment has its own, even though they're all supposed to be identical, they all have weird different behaviors. Some people don't update their test environments for 6 months. Some people update it every day. Somebody uses a piece of duct tape to keep it running. We got rid of all of that at Zoosk. And we just went with one base image that we updated every day. And then anytime anyone needed a test environment, we just spin up an instance based on that image. Boom. We'd have people spin stuff up, test their code, spin it back down, shoot it into production. It was great. The big part was developing a culture of CI/CD. That's what this presentation is about. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And I've already talked about observability, rich monitoring to detect unexpected impacts. This is what our deploy bot looked like. And I know it's not really visible to everybody, but Shri here is doing a basic deploy inside of Slack. The bot's name was Shippy. And all he has to do, he just gives Shippy a git ref. Shippy, now this goes back to the communication. Shippy tells him everything he's going to do. And then when he says continue, Shippy does a set of deploy checks, then sends out a diff. This links straight back to Git so you can see the difference between what you're shipping and what's in production currently. Then it gives him a VIP so that he can hit the container in production. These links, these were all the different logging services we were using, Splunk, New Relic, and Roblar. These are hot links. They actually go directly to the dashboards that relate to the code that he's pushing out. At that point, it's done. It's gone to 100%. He can adjust the percentage or just say done, at which point the next person can go in and then ship. This is actually pretty simple to put together. We put it together in Python. You can use HuBot or one of the other CoffeeScript things that are built in Slack. We decided because we were using Python in most of our backend, it'd be easier to have a Python bot that integrated with them. And we thought it was important, and this goes back to a little bit about what these guys were talking about in the last presentation. We thought it was important that it be friendly. I didn't put in a whole bunch of different things here, but Shippy actually, you could make jokes with him and he would respond. He had a bunch of little hidden Easter eggs to put in there. Because the fact is, when you're asking developers to self-deploy, it can be extremely intimidating. I compare it to asking someone to go up and sing karaoke. I mean, if you're a developer and you're working in a classic environment where you've got your develop branch, your staging branch, your release branches, and your master branch, you're not used to just pushing a button and having it go out in front of 20 million people. So the first time you do that, it can be really scary. We wanted it to be as friendly as possible. We wanted everything to be completely clear and have no questions if anyone's going to run it. Anybody could do it. As a matter of fact, the way that we actually got this sold to our management is before we were going to move from our data center into the cloud, we knew we weren't going to be shipping any new features for a while. So our management came down and said, we want you to take 1 month and just pack in all these new features that we want. And we know everyone's going to be working weekends and late night, but we're going to put in bonuses, we're going to have contests, we're going to have food every night. And I stepped up and said, this is the point that we should do self-deploy. And everyone was very concerned. But the result was, a month later, we got all those features shipped. No one worked on the weekends, no late nights. That's what you tell your management. And we easily got 3 months worth of features in 1 month because we were doing CI/CD. These are some of the ground rules that I put in place. I've copied those out. And some of those echo what you heard in your last presentation. So some of the most important thing to remember is that when you're doing CI/CD, there's always a concern that something can go wrong. The best way to make sure that you can get better quickly is to have your team around you. So no deploying in the middle of the night. Deploy when people are around between 9:38 and 6 p.m. Anything after 6 p.m., you have to coordinate with a manager, or 2 p.m. on Friday. I thought about putting that same meme in about Friday. I had a whole bunch of Friday night deploys. Oh my goodness. My axiom is that Friday night deploys turn into Saturday morning escalations. I don't like them. Monitor your changes, stay in the deploy channel for a while in case someone says, hey, something just went wrong. Be mindful of other people waiting for you. If you need an isolation window, which happens, sometimes you've got a whole bunch of people who want to deploy and one guy says, wait a second, I got to put my stuff out and I got to watch it for a while. That's fine, just let us know ahead of time. And communicate changes to everybody, including customer support. It becomes very easy, very quick and easy to make changes and forget to mention this to the people who are answering the phone when something goes wrong. And then even after calling clear, check metrics. The interesting thing about this, when I first put it together, I wanted to lock Shippy so that Shippy would not deploy after 2 p.m. on a Friday, or that Shippy would not deploy after 6 p.m. on a weekday. We decided not to do that. We didn't put any guardrails on Shippy at all. We decided to make it entirely social. The reason being, I felt like if someone couldn't sleep on a Saturday night and they went in and they saw that the service was misbehaving, if they had the ability to fix it right then and there, they should be able to do it. So we didn't stop them from shipping after 2 p.m. on a Friday. We just asked them not to. And they didn't. It was very clear. So this worked very well. It speaks to how culture can be a better guideline for CI/CD than a lot of the way we normally think in the tech industry, where we just put hard rules in that, no, you have to go into this lane. Give people the ability to be flexible when they need to. So what were the elements of success? Well, we had a well-disciplined team and developed deploy cadence in the lead up to CI/CD. I'm going to talk about that for a little bit because I went to a bunch of different organizations that were trying to do CI/CD and were failing at it. And I've talked to different people that were having different problems, and it made me realize that it was our cadence before we went to CI/CD that enabled us to be successful after we went to CI/CD. Now, what do I mean by cadence? Well, when I first arrived at Zoosk, the VP of engineering, very cool guy, Peter Ofringa, he was former military. And he liked this weekly deploy happening every week at the same time. Come hell or high water, that was gonna go out. And that pushed all of us to develop our own culture, make sure we were communicating with each other and making sure that we hit that deploy window every week. We got so good at it, we could have done the whole thing in our sleep. You know, that's a traditional deploy where everything stops. We tell everybody, leave us alone for 2 hours. We go through all the, you guys know all this stuff. You've been through those deploys. But because we had that discipline, when we started speeding up how we were deploying, it was pretty painless. What I've seen with a lot of other companies is that you have unexpected hot fixes that are going out a couple times a day, and they say, well, we're in a CI/CD position because look at how often we're shipping. That's not really the same thing. So what I've gone back with a number of people is I was like, if you want to get into CI/CD, make sure you have a cadence. Keep that cadence. Keep it very disciplined. If you get to the end of your sprint and you don't have anything to ship, ship code anyway. Even if you've got code that isn't there's no APIs for it to use, just ship. Just get in that habit. Ship, ship, ship. Make it like a heartbeat. And then when you speed it up, it becomes a lot less painful. It's very clear and easy to do. I've also mentioned here an environment of trust and communication. I mean, that can't be understated as well. You heard a lot about that in the last presentation too. No surprises. You'd be interested, how could you be deploying 10 times a day and have no surprises? Well, you get it if you get into that habit and you know to communicate people really well and you develop those trusts and you develop those relationships, you do get no surprises. You get the ability to handle things very quickly. Monitoring and a blameless approach to unexpected issues. This was something that we struggled with when I was at Microsoft. But we were really good at it. Is when there's a problem, work the problem. Don't go around trying to figure out whose fault it is. That's just a waste of energy. The one thing you can count is things are going to screw up from time to time. So just work the problem, be blameless about it. Once it's fixed, then we can sit down and figure out, well, what did we do wrong and how can we not do it again? And simplify, simplify, simplify. That goes back to that shippy that I was showing you earlier. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I learned a lot. Like I said, Peter was ex-military, and I've never been a military person. I don't know anything about the military. But one of the things I've learned is that in the military, they try and keep everything as simple as possible because when you're under attack, you don't want to have to run back to the armory and figure out what the right ammo is to put in your gun and then run back out again. You need everything simple so that you don't have to think and just respond to the incident. This is the same with CI/CD. That's why, going back here, we have all the links right there in front of you. So that's next to cadence, I would say simplify, simplify, simplify is the next biggest thing. It kind of went to what you were saying too. It becomes easier for everyone to understand. So comparison with other journeys. One thing I've heard over and over again, executives saying something like, we want to do the same thing we're doing right now, only faster. I think of continuous delivery as being like a microphone. If you sing in the shower every morning, you might think you sound pretty good. But then when someone gives you a microphone and puts you in front of a stadium full of people, suddenly you sound, whatever you sounds bad is now louder and everyone in the world can hear it. This is exactly what happens when you move to this kind of situation. You've got to learn to sing. So you're not going to be doing the same thing, only faster. You're going to be doing things in a different way. And it's going to eventually be better. So, and again, like I've said, no sense of cadence. When you see things like stakeholders who don't trust each other and people who are running around blaming each other, it's incredible how quickly that is reflected in the code that goes out into production. It's stunning. It's like a band that isn't getting along. They go up and give a concert, and you can tell they're not in time with each other. Software is very similar to that. Yes, and lack of monitoring. Like I said, keep going back to monitoring. Deploys aren't well understood and tons of surprises. Believe it or not, I mean, I've been doing deploys for 20 years now. Back at MSN when I first started, a long time ago, those deploys would sometimes take 10 or 12 hours. We do it overnight. Have some stories about running around the Microsoft campus at night. I never thought I would say deploys are trivial. Deploys in a production become trivial. But we got there, where it was nobody cared. This is where you can get to, if you are lucky to get into that kind of environment. So what to look for, culture starts at the top. As I said, if you've got people at the top who are very blaming, who are not open, then the people in the organization are going to reflect their values. So it becomes important that you have that level of trust throughout your entire organization. I loved your idea of walking around every morning and talking to people and just developing that relationship and developing that trust. That's a fantastic way to do it. It's a great way to start. But remember, it's not just the people at the top, it's everyone else as well. It's all the people at the bottom that trust those relationships, they need to be there. Good monitoring. And if all else fails, implement a real hardcore cadence that you ask your organization to put together, because the cadence will actually create the culture. Even if there's no other way to get the culture together, it's like the beat of a drummer. Once everyone's dancing to that same beat, they start to develop their own moves. They start to figure out how they work around each other. This is a fun thing I put at the end, a survival bias. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. Back in World War II, the Navy asked a guy named Abraham Wald to look at their planes. They were all the planes that were coming back from combat. They were saying, where should we put the armor to make sure that they don't go down? And all the red spots represent where most of the bullet holes were. If you haven't read what's on the side here yet, can anyone see where the real problem is? That's right. That's right. They didn't have any of the planes that went down to study. And if you look at this, you can see exactly where those planes were hit. They were hit in the spot where the bullet hole, any hits to these spots, they were down. Think about how that applies to your service. Think about exactly what is it that you're not looking at? What are your perceptions that you've already inherited that you haven't thought about? Because I can guarantee you, if you spend a couple hours thinking about it tonight, tomorrow morning you'll say, a spot that isn't being looked at. I can give you a link to that later if you want, man. It's Abraham Wald. Yeah, that was my thing. I guess that was shorter than I planned. Yeah, anyone have any questions?
So I don't know about your developers, but perfect code is incredibly hard to find. And deployed imperfect code can break things. What happens? What was your solution to that?
It's a good question. Well, because I worked in QA for a lot of my career. I've also worked as a PM, and I've worked in some other stuff as well. And I'm always convinced that no matter how complete your coverage is and how much automation you have, there's always something there that you missed. You can imagine how I felt doing security patches for ATMs. The short answer is that monitoring would tell us very quickly when there was a problem, because we had, with Shippy and our entire system underneath it, all we needed to do was say revert, and it would go flip back to the previous container. We would keep the previous container staged, and we were only hitting one container at a time. The thing that became difficult for us was maintaining API contracts, because all of our automation at that point was like UI automation. So we had to develop a whole new set of automation that was specific to API contracts. That took a while. And there were some times, but things didn't go wrong. One of the things I didn't show with Shippy, it was saying rollout to 100%. You could actually have only rolled it out to 50% or 1% or even 0%. I really liked rolling it out to 0% because then I could actually hit the container in production through the VIP, and I knew nobody else was looking at it. If there was something there that I missed, I would know it really quickly.
VIP isn't Penske or anybody sounding like that. What's a VIP?
The IP, the actual IP, the address of the container in the cloud. So, you hack your host file. We actually came up with a little thing that would do it automatically, but you put in a host file to make sure that when you put in the address, it goes directly to that container.
So VIP is virtual IP?
Yeah. Sorry. Better answer. But the short answer, it goes back to the monitoring. And monitoring can get really expensive, and that's hard to justify to your executives. I don't want to talk about what the actual costs were here because I don't think they want me saying that, but we were spending a lot, but it was worth it for that real-time monitoring. And there were a lot of things we were seeing over a period of time that would show up only after it had been in production for 48 hours. But then we were able to trace it back to exactly when this problem started, revert that code, and we were good.
But if you've got multiple releases, what do you revert?
Well, if we were able to trace it back to the exact moment it started, then we would have the actual Git code for that, the Git ref to that specific code change. Since we were all completely containerized, most of the changes would be hitting different containers. We could flip it back without worrying about impacting anything.
And that's where your API process came in.
Right. But we really actually rarely saw that very much. One of the things that, and this again, I should have talked about this, one of the things that our executives became very excited about was once we had the ability to put 2 containers into production and direct a small amount of traffic to only 1 container, that gave them the ability to do rich A/B testing. And they themselves could go to Shippy and adjust that percentage anytime they wanted to. So we would sometimes do an A/B test that we would leave for an hour, for a day, for sometimes for months. And that was, from a business perspective, this isn't supposed to be a business conversation, but that was incredibly powerful and incredibly helpful to the company's success. We had a couple of different sign-up funnels we wanted to try. Now, on a dating site, people tend to get shy and bounce onto the sign-up funnel at a very high rate. So any percentage we could add to people who would make it through the sign-up funnel would correlate directly to an increase in revenue. So if we could put we would just try flipping the questions around and maybe rephrasing things and put one thing later in the funnel than earlier in the funnel for different questions. We tweaked with that and did A/B tests over the course of about 3 months. At the end of that time, we were able to see our throughput go up by about 15%, which correlated immediately to our overall revenues. And that's something that we could have done without this whole system, but it would have been a lot more complicated. Plus, the executives could see the results right away. So, yeah, think about that from the terms of, a new API instead of a sign-up funnel or some new code you wanted to try, just putting in a percentage and letting it run, see what happens.
Hi, great talk. So what's the goal of Shippy to do a blue-green deployment model, or did you have any specific models in your mind?
Will we put Shippy together?
Yeah, you said you can go from 0 to 100%, right? And roll back easily. So was it designed with a blue-green deployment model or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we designed it that way. I don't think we were directly, I think some of the guys on the team were thinking about A/B tests, but most of us were just thinking about deploying in safety. I'm allergic to downtime. It makes me paranoid. So when we were talking about how this was going to be done, one of the guys came up with, well, we don't have to just put things into production. We can roll them in slowly. And I'm like, that's what I want. And it turned out that there were much more features available to that than I'd realized. So
do you test with your end users? When you say do 50%, is it always a manual testing within your side, or do you involve your users in that?
Oh no, we put a QA sign-off into part of the process. I didn't include that for the purposes of this presentation, but anything that we would put into production would have gone through a full set of automation, and if necessary, a check from an individual QA person before it went into production. But like I said earlier, you always miss something, and your users are going to be the ones who told you what you miss. If you're watching those traffic patterns, you can frequently catch it before they even pick up the phone and start complaining.
Anybody else? Yeah,
Sure.
Just one question. Like, can you talk about any challenge, a creative challenge that you faced? Anything that comes to your mind that you wanna?
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, I'm not sure where to start. Yeah, I've seen things. I've seen such horrible things. No,
Most horrible.
no. Well, I would say that the biggest pain point for us was simply, I mean, we had this great data center, and it was really a thing of beauty. I mean, I don't have any pictures of it, but I kind of wish I did, because it looked like something. I was used to the data centers that I saw early in my career at Microsoft were really thrown together because it's the early days of the internet. And just like you get code debt, you get these things, no one knows exactly what all the cords do that are running through the whole place. So when I saw the data center we had at Zeus, it looked like it looked like a data center from a magazine brochure. I was like, wow, that's amazing. But, it didn't scale right. It was a data center. So, re-optimizing our code and re-optimizing everything to move it into the cloud was incredibly painful. And I don't even know where to start. I could talk all night. And that was very hard to sell to our executives because, at the end of the day, because we were running our data center so efficiently, we didn't even know if we were going to save money in the cloud. We just thought, hopefully, we were going to. So that was a long project that at the end of which, we didn't know if we'd be able to say, look, it still runs. It was basically success for us. But we put that CI/CD process that I've just told you about into place before we did the cloud migration. And that sped up the process of the cloud migration tremendously. If we hadn't done that, we'd probably still be working on it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, well, I have a question. That was awesome. So can we clap for you? Sweet.
Oh, I forget.
Tell us, yes.
I forget. Everyone asks me the same two questions, and that's usually how I start out my presentation. I'm 6'7". That's 200 centimeters for my metric friends, and no, I don't play basketball. Just on Xbox. So thank you very much, everybody.